Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 176, cover dated December 1983. So this is a very designy, striking cover featuring Cyclops in the grip of a betentacled sea creature and using his optic blast to blast, well, the X-Men's logo. And this one by new series artist John Romita Jr. The story goes that Romita Jr., well, he says himself, he was tapped by the editors to operate as a fill-in artist on the book until they found a more suitable penciler artist for the regular gig. And then he ended up drawing the book all the way to Uncanny X-Men 211. So this particular cover is penciled and inked by John Romita Jr. There's his signature there, and it's a nice one. I like the use of obviously a brush here on the sinews of the tentacles, and the colors also are pretty nice, and they look like they've been painted, and to my eye these are Glynis wine or Oliver colors on the cover. So let's open this one up to the splash page. This one picks up from the end of the previous issue, where Scott and Madelyne Pryor got married, and here they are on honeymoon, and we have Scott wishing Madelyne a good morning, and she's piloting what turns out to be a seaplane en route to their Pacific Island honeymoon destination. So really nice art here. This is very reminiscent of the way that Paul Smith drew the characters, so Romita Jr. doing his best to keep some kind of aesthetic continuity for readers who enjoyed the Paul Smith run. And our creative team here is Chris Claremont, writer, John Romita Jr., penciler, Bob Wiacek, inker, Glynis Wine, colorist, and Tom Orzechowski, letterer. And the title of the story is Decisions. And one of those decisions is a lingering one for Cyclops, which is whether he'll take up his father's offer to go away into space on the Starjammer and leave Earth behind, perhaps permanently. So he's been mulling that over for months, in addition with his decision to marry Madelyne and the question of her identity, but that was resolved in the previous issue. She is not Dark Phoenix, she is not Jean Grey reincarnated. And so here they are aboard their seaplane, and this is a bit of a humorous moment, but also fitting for what is happening here, that they're on their honeymoon. So Scott asks Madelyne to try another kiss, or well, actually no, it is Madelyne who says to Scott that he should try for another kiss. This old crate can fly herself for a while. And then we get the narrative caption later, and Scott returning to the seat beside Madelyne. Bet you never realized that was an incredible or an incorrigible romantic, incorrigible something, that's for sure. I took your breath away, he says. That you did. So I think we know what occurred between them in the interim period, a little bit more than some kissing, yes. And so they continue along on their flight path, but right behind them is a storm, and they're trying to stay ahead of that. But their seaplane is struck by a bolt of lightning, and they lose the electrical systems, which short circuit out. And then the narrative captions say, a vicious gust throws the goose onto one wing. She hangs poised a moment. Quick action by her crew could still save her, but nothing happens. And she rolls onto her back to begin a fast, fatal spin towards the Pacific far below. So something I want to comment on here is, like, this is not easy to draw what Claremont has tasked John Romita Jr. to do. And he does a great job, and there's lots of drawing chutzpah on display in this particular issue, and I'll point it out as we come to it. So then the scene switches to Agarashima in the northern Japanese prefecture of Miyagi, and it's the clan Yashida ancestral home. And here we have Mariko in bed. She broke up with Wolverine, jilted him at the altar, so to speak, in Uncanny X-Men 173. And here, look at the screen tone here of the silhouette of Wolverine's costume on Mariko's bedspread. and he's returned the honor sword of Clan Yashida to her. Great art on this page by Romita Jr. and Wiacek. Great use of silhouette too, and spotting of blacks. And what's happening here is that Mariko has sent by Imperial Messenger the honor sword to Wolverine in New York. He wants to know why. And she says to him, "It's yours by right." And he says here, this is a great panel, he says, "If that's true, you're mine as well." Because Mariko was under the control of Mastermind, along with ultimately Madelyne Pryor. And it turns out that that was the reason she called off their wedding, because she was under his control. And Wolverine makes the point to her, he's beaten Miko. Xavier undid all the psychic damage he caused. Everything should be just the way it was. But Mariko questions him, "Are you mad or blind to think that nothing is the same? When you killed my father, you chose the path of honor." That was in the Wolverine Limited series by Frank Miller and Chris Claremont. "Though you believed that doing so would cost that which you held as dear, me. Now, beloved, is it my turn?" So she says that she has got to remain true to her sense of honor. She has to undertake the task of cleansing Clan Yashida of any ties to the Japanese underworld. And she says to Wolverine, "If you love me, more importantly, if you respect me, you will let me do so." And he asks her, "Suppose you fail? Then the man to whom I've entrusted my heart will do what must be done." So Wolverine picks up the honor sword, takes it with him, bids her sayonara, and then she thinks here, "You risked all to prove yourself worthy of me, Wolverine. It is only fitting that I do the same. I do not want to die, nor to see others slain in my name, but I am Lord of Clan Yashida. I cannot shirk that responsibility, no matter the cost." So she's left in tears as Wolverine returns to New York. Again, just excellent art on this page. Great use of silhouette on Wolverine, and a great combination of colour too, with Glynis Oliver's colours on these pages. And then we switch scenes back to somewhere in the mid-Pacific. So the seaplane did manage to land. Madelyne obviously managed to land it without it being completely destroyed or killing them, but it's damaged and they're undertaking repairs. And the storm front is coming their way, so they're under time pressure. And Scott slips on the wing, and he just narrowly misses being eaten by what looks like a great white shark. And he blasts it with his optic blast, and Madelyne grabs him. He's shaking from the adrenaline, and he says, "I'm scared. I mean, after all I've been through as an X-Man, to get eaten by a shark on my honeymoon is a bit much." And indeed it is. So they decide to continue fixing the engines, but there's another threat lurking in the deep, and it's this betentacled sea monster that grabs the great white and pulls it down to the depths, turning it from hunter to prey. And I love the point of view here where we're looking up from the sea monster's point of view up at the seaplane sitting on the currently calm surface of the Pacific. And then we switch scenes, and this is interesting, like there's scene switches going on the same page rather than on a new page. And I wonder, has that got to do with, is that in Claremont's script, or is it Romita Jr. working Marvel plot style here and making this decision himself to switch the scenes? In any case, we shift to Washington, D.C. We've got Henry Peter Gyrick going to the National Security Council meeting. So he walks along to find this guy at the podium talking about the recent events with Magneto that we saw in Uncanny X-Men 150, where he destroyed a Soviet city, giving the denizens of the city warning to escape, but he destroyed the city nonetheless. And he ends his speech by saying, "Magneto had issued a worldwide ultimatum, either disarm all nuclear weaponry and cede absolute sovereignty to him, or face annihilation. The Soviet response was to launch a missile strike at Magneto's base of operations. He sank the sub that fired them, that was the Leningrad. and proceeded to make an object lesson of the Soviet city, Varyakino. Inexplicably, after those initial communications, nothing more was heard from him. He never carried out his ultimate threat. Either he was bluffing or changed his mind, or some outside agency stopped him. It was the X-Men in issue 150. Had he persisted, our computers granted him a strong possibility of success, even against the opposition of such so-called superhero groups as the Avengers. Indeed, our research further indicates that were the Avengers themselves to attempt the conquest of the Earth, they could do so with ease. So this is the situation that the world finds itself in, and the US in particular. And now he calls Dr. Valerie Cooper in her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men and the X-Books to the podium to further present on the question that faces the Council. And she gives a speech about a new evolutionary branch of Homo sapiens, mutants, one of the most prominent groups among them, the X-Men, featured here in this anchor image. And then she continues, initially the concern about mutant kind was couched in purely biological terms, that they might one day supplant us as rulers of the Earth. However, the situation has grown considerably more complicated and dangerous. The virtual monopoly of super beings, mutant or otherwise, once enjoyed by the United States, no longer exists. So Claremont pulling back and thinking out like real world consequences for the proliferation of mutants and superpowered beings in the Marvel Universe, and thinking about, okay, what would be the geopolitical real world response to something like this? And that's what we're getting on these pages. So Valerie Cooper makes the case that the US must have the ability to protect itself and, if necessary, strike back. And Gyrich says, you're suggesting we fight fire with fire, counter foreign mutants with some of our own? Precisely, she says. She says, mutants pose a clear and present danger to our country that must be dealt with today, for tomorrow will be too late. So this is laying the groundwork for Freedom Force and ultimately the likes of X Factor, a government-sponsored, legitimate team of mutants operating in the interests of the US government. And then we switch back in this bottom panel to the Pacific and the seaplane with Scott and Madelyne, and they're trying the engines again, but it just doesn't work. I like the sound effects here, gnur, pocketa to pocketa, blam. So the engine blows out, and Cyclops is despairing because he was certain he had it this time, but he's thinking he must be screwing up, but he's damned if he can figure out where. And then, this is interesting, Madelyne makes kind of an ill-judged remark here. Pity I didn't turn out to be Phoenix, like Mastermind made you all believe. Then I could simply fly us to safety. And Scott isn't happy with that at all. If you had even the slightest conception of the reality of Phoenix, Madelyne, he says, you wouldn't make jokes. But anyway, here's this tentacle emerging from the surface of the Pacific as they go about working on the engines again, and so that threat is looming beneath the water. And then we switch to New York City, and I like this series of 4 vertical panels as we go from a view of the skyscrapers in the pouring rain, the rain-sodden streets of Manhattan, the rainwater gushing down the sewers into the Morlock tunnels 1,000 feet beneath the surface. And here we have Caliban entering his room, and he's met there by Mask, Callisto, and Sunder. And Callisto asks him if anything's wrong, what's going on with him. He's been missing for some time. And she says, I may have been deposed as leader of the Morlocks by that X-Man Weather Witch Storm that was back in 169, but I still care about my people. And Caliban is depressed, and it's because Kitty Pryde made him a promise that if Caliban helped the X-Men, she would stay with him forever. For love of her, Caliban betrayed his friends, but she lied, she never returned. So this is setting up a story for Uncanny X-Men 179 coming up in a few months' time. And Callisto says, it's the child who's at fault. She gave her word. I mean to see she keeps it. And so there we have set up that Caliban gets his heart's desire, and and also Callisto's, thinking she might get her heart's desires too if Storm objects. And then we're back to the Pacific. They gun the engine again. They're running, and just as Madelyne is pulling up the anchor, she's grabbed by these tentacles, and she is pulled, naturally enough, underwater. So Scott realizes, and he dives straight into the water to go after her, sees the tentacle, blasts it. I love the use of magenta here. And then he himself is grabbed by tentacles from under the water, and he's pulled down here in this vertical panel. And I love the use of screen tone here in the background as well, indicating the murkiness of those depths. Great colors on these pages by Glynis Oliver too. And he loses his ruby quartz glasses for a moment, but grabs them again, because of course he can't lose those glasses because he's blind without them. And he blasts the sea monster and makes his way towards Madelyne, but then he's grabbed by a tentacle once again right across the face and loses the glasses. So he's in big trouble now. So he blasts the tentacle at close range, surfaces, can't open his eyes, and he shouts for Madelyne, who tells him to swim straight ahead. He's grabbed again by the sea monster, and then he just lets rip. Let's see how well this monster handles a full power blast. I love this panel here, and I love the inking by Bob Wiacek and the use of white media here cut into the black. Very nice work. And then we see the ink that's emerged from the giant squid. Well, Romita Jr. is drawing an octopus a lot of the time, but here's the squid ink anyway, indicating that it's defeated, and it's defending itself by hiding in the ink discharge. Scott surfaces again without the glasses, but Madelyne helps him to the plane, and in his travel bag he's got his X-Men Cyclops visor, which he puts on. And so now he's able to see once again. Madelyne makes it into the seaplane. The storm is above them, so they're under massive time pressure. And she tells him to hit those switches and let's roll. So the engines start up again, or they stop. This one is on fire, catches fire. Cyclops is in despair. But he says, nothing left but to keep trying till we get it right. How about a kiss for luck? And Madelyne says, for love. Good pilots never depend on luck. And we, Hotshot, are two of the best. Ignition and the engine start up. And this is a great sequence here with these horizontal panels across the page. So we see the seaplane at different angles on the choppy water and taking off. And then they're airborne and just their joy there. And then, of course, a kiss. And then they're up above the storm clouds. So that is quite an action-packed conclusion to this issue. And then we're on the last page. And here we have them in relief. They're not out of the woods yet. Madelyne says they've no instrumentation, no communications, and a very long way to go to reach a very small island in the middle of a really huge ocean. But Cyclops isn't worried anymore. No problem. We'll make it fine. You got my guarantee. And she says to him, thank you, Mr. Modest. And so he's sounding awfully chipper to her. And why? Being alive has that effect sometimes. Also, I made up my mind about joining my dad and the Starjammers. So here's the big decision. He's going off to fight a war. I've seen enough of war and death. His life's made him hard, almost cruel, in a way I never want to be. I want to be selfish for a while. I want a life, a family, all the things I never had before the X-Men. I want you, Madelyne. I want to be happy. Is that wrong? And she says, sounds great to me, and I'll bet your dad as well. So there they go, off into the sunset and their island honeymoon destination. And Scott out of the X-Men, out of the Shi'ar war, and to a life of marital bliss and perhaps a new family. Cyclops' happy ending, at least until the resurrection of Jean Grey in Fantastic Four number 286, and the beginning of Jim Shooter's idea for X Factor. So here, speaking of Jim Shooter, is this weird little note from him about the cover. But what we get to see here is he's talking about the decision to damage the logo. But what we see here is a couple of thumbnail sketches by Romita Jr., his designs for the cover. This one's pretty cool. Kind of got a Neil Adams vibe to it. Nice stuff. So there's no letters page in this issue, and that is it. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 176. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.